Hi and welcome. We're now into gender and gendered media. Media pervades our environment. Media pervades our everyday life in the form of the internet, television, movies, video, music, advertisements, magazines, news programs, books, cell phones, tablets, social media. Holy mackerel, we're really affected by media. Now, social media, and as you can imagine, we're talking Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Tinder, any of these other social media connectors with people have increased in popularity and make it even easier to connect with others, both the good and the bad. 93% of teens use the internet, and most use it every day. Social media offers the opportunity for people to become producers, not just consumers of media. And that's an important distinction to make, that everybody who has an account in something can become a producer. And so that really should make you think that when you go searching for information that's legitimate, reliable, valid, and by authoritative people who have the authority to speak on something, you have to be very, very careful when searching for information, because everybody's an author and not everybody has the authority to be an authentic, reliable, valid, credible author. And not everybody says, hey, I'm just average Joe here and I'm just saying this piece. Sometimes they come across in much more, in an authoritative way where they don't have the justification for it. So always be careful, be a critical thinker. Media saturation of cultural life, well, people today are media saturated and media engaged, with as many as 98.9% of all households owning at least one TV. Now remember, this is US data. Canada data is particularly similar on some of these more media-related things in technology. Films, newspapers, magazines, advertising, radio, social media fill our lives with media. And we can voluntarily go out and get it for a small fee, and sometimes for what is appearing to be free. The other component about media and social media in particular, that when we are participating in it, we are in fact voluntarily giving our data and the things that we post to the company, by which that gets sold to third-party providers as data. Data is huge in today's world and generated out of a lot of the social media. Social media allows us to connect with others, shop, participate online, in online communities, even produce media. But the impact of media, well, although most people think that they are immune from media's influence, this is called the third person effect, which is the belief that others are more affected by media than we are. But the reality is, and researchers have found, that media shapes our identities, understandings, and our opinions, and we're not always sure who the authorities are, and if what we are doing to form our opinions or be identified, or our understandings, are from authentic authors. Media influences how we perceive the roles of men and women and the relationships in three very important ways. First, it's what's known as set the agenda. The agenda setting theory suggests that media tells us what's important. These theories argue that media don't tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about. And I've been following a number of different news stories, and one in which I follow a bit is keeping up with what's going on in the US and US politics. And one of the things that comes up a lot is Trump's ability to, or inability to control the news cycle. And what's meant by that is what news gets represented, and therefore what gets exposed to a population. Because what gets exposed to a population is just what we're just talking about setting the agenda, about this is what you should be thinking about. Not telling us how to think, but this is what you should be thinking about. And so in terms of gender, media tells us a lot about the things that we should be thinking about. Not that that's the right thing. In fact, oftentimes it's not. It's setting an agenda that isn't necessarily in my best interests or in the population's best interest, or right or wrong. It's just sort of getting us to think and play a role, and that's the setting the agenda. Now, in order to sort of protect, there's a feature that's called a gatekeeper. And a gatekeeper is a person or a group who controls what messages get through to the consumer. Now, this typically would be the newspaper, news, or media editors, the owners, the shareholders. The producers are examples of gatekeepers. They regulate images for women and men, and the media acts like a gatekeeper, regulating the images of gender. So, let's consider how this is done. And we're going to start with the underrepresented women and minorities. Although women outnumber men in a population, typically by, 51, 52% to 48, 49%, they are not equally visible in media, particularly as substantive characters. Now, when we talk about substantive characters, we mean characters of importance, characters that are valued, characters that are held in higher esteem. Women are rarely shown as authorities in the news programming. You'll see a video in Journal 5 outlining the Bechdel test, and this looks at gender bias in films. And it's an interesting perspective. It isn't necessarily one you might agree with, but the challenge would be out there for you to watch movies that you like and shows that you like and see how they do using the Bechdel test. Minority group members are more likely to be appearing in supporting roles or more likely to be shown with their own racial culture and values obscured. When minority groups are represented, they are shown in ways that align with the stereotypes of those cultures. Now, when we think in terms of portraying men stereotypically, the portrayals of men include depictions of men and males as being independent, strong, aggressive, and in charge. Traditionally, masculine men are praised and valued in the media. White masculinity is shown as the standard for all men. Now, hip-hop and rap music is a rare exception, but it tends to emphasize problematic stereotypes of black men rather than representative of what that hip-hop and rap genre is about. More complex portrayals of men, for example, men are also seen as caring, sensitive, and sometimes those are offered in movies, but it's not what is typical. Portraying women stereotypically, the portrayals of women include depictions of females presented as shopping, grooming, being emotional, being focused on men, being sexual, or performing domestic activities. Whiteness is a standard and the ideal. Images of black women are often based on very negative stereotypes. Asian women and Latinos are often presented as exotic, and they're often sexualized. Women are frequently seen as sex objects. Even animated film shows of women with small waist and large breasts. Even as girls are sexualized, the media reinforces the notion that they alone are responsible for the consequences of sex. Women are usually seen as either good or bad. Bad women are witches, bitches, whores, or iron maidens. Good women are often pretty and passive, but this ideal has been challenged and expanded recently, and you'll see women like the angels in Charlie's Angels, or Rose in Titanic, or and the women on Sex and the City and Desperate Housewives may seem progressive and strong at first, but all of these women also have very traditional feminine characteristics and are dependent upon men. And that's I can only imagine when I become aware of, some of these stereotypes, if I watch movies, and I do, and I look for these sorts of variables, I see them more than I would have expected. And it's still surprising to me. Gendered images in advertising, and this is one of the things that I asked you to do in your assignment. It didn't have to be about advertising, but it's often part of what it is. Ads also show these gendered portrayals of men and women. We are repeatedly exposed to the same messages. A majority of the ads feature visual images which are less subject to conscious analysis than the verbal claims. We tend to think that we are immune to advertising. Ads for men portraying men in stereotypical ways, and they tend to link hypermasculinity and violence. Men are seen as unable to do domestic tasks like clean and care for children. Men are seen as lazy or incompetent in the house. Even though women are seen as being successful in the home, male authority is still seen in ads through male voiceovers and male images like Mr. Clean. And in fact, with the Mr. Clean commercials, he's this authority. And you'll see in other examples of cleaning supplies and household resources that are expected to be women used, men will be doing the voiceovers as if they're some authority on cleaning. The objectification of women is often seen in ads. Women's sexuality is used to sell products. Many of these products sold to women are about their physical appearance. I've done this class many times in class, and I would challenge students to say, tell me, what is this ad about? And we look at it, and you see a car, you see a fancy medallion on this man, and a suit dressed. The woman splayed over the car and is wearing... Why do we need a woman splayed on the hood of a car to sell a car? What does that have to do with performance or efficiency? Or fuel consumption? Nothing. And yet, if it didn't work, advertisers wouldn't spend the money doing it. So it must work. Advertising presents the foci of women's lives as physical appearance and pleasing others. Now, there's a term that's used in the media area. It's called complementary copy. These are articles that increase the appeal of a product. Product placement, brands or products that are put, that are mentioned in another form of media. Say if you're watching a movie, and in that movie the character is drinking a Coca-Cola, that would be product placement. And there's also what's known as immersive advertising. This is where a product or a brand that is incorporated into the entire storyline. Example of this was Prada in Gossip Girl books. Prada is a advertising brand. All influence our relationships to products. So the third element is motivate us to consume. Some analysis argue that the primary function of media is to encourage us to buy things and services. Overly perfect bodies in the media can cause us to think our own bodies are inadequate, but offer us products that purport to change our bodies and self-images. Media causes us to perceive normally functioning bodies as unacceptable or defective. So it promotes, indirectly, steroid abuse is one of the consequences for men. Normal changes in men's sexual vigor, shown as something to cure with drugs. It's been historic. Men's testosterone levels drop, therefore their sexual performance may diminish over time, but media has contributed to making it an issue that needs to be cured rather than this is, the nature's way, but no, we got to find a medication to correct that. Women's body hair is represented as something to be removed with products like razors and shaving creams because somehow it's inappropriate to have body hair. Well, if it was, why do we still get born with the capacity to have body hair? Plastic surgery is more and more common and can have lasting effects on those who choose to undergo operations. So gender and social media. We use our social media to communicate with others is closely related to gender issues. Social networking, I'm sure you're familiar with this. There are some gender differences in how men and women use social media. Men and boys tend to be more instrumental in their use of media. Using them to set up activities, for example, men and boys also tend to use some social media such as games and virtual spaces more often than women do. Girls and women see phone conversations and textings as ways to nurture relationships. Functions of social media, if we're looking at, well, what's the function of it? Well, social networking is one of the most popular uses of social media, and social networking, social media is social networking. Women and girls tend to use social networking as a resource for creating and maintaining relationships. Girls and women frequently use social networking for self-development, talking about their experiences and thoughts and incorporating others' reactions to those ideas into their own identities. Social networks can have a major downside, and maybe some of you have experienced this, and that is cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is communication via social network that is meant to hurt or humiliate another person. LGBTQ teens and girls who are less physically developed are perceived as less or more attractive by their peers, and boys, especially non-white boys, who are perceived as more feminine than their peers, are more likely to be cyberbullied. Cyberbullying has major consequences for the victim, ranging from troubles sleeping, anxiety, right through to suicide, as has been seen on several occasions. Cyberbullying is different than face-to-face bullying in that it can be done anonymously and that it has no boundaries, following the victim at all times. So, learning and sharing information. The internet offers unparalleled sources of information about gendered issues. Users can also find support and information related to specific issues. Holding others accountable. Social media has frequently been used to hold organizations and powerful interests accountable for sexism and gendered violence. You see that individual people or organizations and groups can influence brands, corporations, and the roles that they play in media. Activism. Our social communities are frequently used for purposes of activism. Organizations can use social media sites to get their message out to interested parties. Social media also allow activists to organize fast responses to issues. So what are some of the consequences of gendered media? Well, we have normalized unrealistic standards. When we're exposed to the unrealistic images of men and women in media, we tend to see ourselves as inadequate. Media exposes us to flawed representations of relationships as well. This can cause us to assess our own relationships unfairly. People can become dissatisfied with real and healthy relationships as a result of these images. Pathologizing of the natural body can be dangerous. That is, to find errors that are pathologically based in our bodies is dangerous, because then we are looking for cures for what is something that is really just normal. The emphasis is on thinness can lead to all sorts of eating disorders. Men are increasingly affected by unrealistic body expectations as well. There's a tendency to normalize violence against women, and this evidence that violence is in the media contributes to increasing violence in the real life. Research shows that when men watch sexually explicit films that degrade women, they become more dominant towards women around them. Another study shows that men who watch music videos and pro wrestling believe that forcing a partner to have sex is something that's acceptable. Now, I would bet dollars to donuts that almost every one of those men who may have had that sort of perspective carried forward in their own lives, probably if he were asked, is it acceptable to force a partner into sex, would say absolutely not. No, of course not. So a lot of this is something that, we don't voluntarily acknowledge about ourselves, but can find ourselves influenced without really knowing. Sometimes silence is permission. That is to say, sometimes when we don't acknowledge it in ourselves, when we don't talk about the issues, it seems like that will just make it all go away, and it doesn't. When we see violence frequently in media, we can see it as normal part of life. Now, that's not just on, we see this in so many different aspects of media. And there are several theories of gender development show that relationships between media violence and real life violence, there is a relationship. Social learning theory would argue that when men and boys see images of men being rewarded for engaging in violence against women, they would be more likely to behave that way themselves. Now, it just says more likely. It doesn't say cause. So that doesn't mean everybody who watches violence or views graphic images of violence to women will behave in that way. But how many times after watching it does it become benign and maybe something that creeps into your life experience before you know it? Cognitive development theory would say that when women and girls see women in media inviting or allowing violence against them, they might think such violence is acceptable. Symbolic interactionalists would say the social views of relationships represented in media can affect how we see our own relationships. That if I see these sorts of relationships occurring, whether it's domestication of women or the connection between violence towards women and men, I might start to see that as being how relationships are supposed to be. If people are looking to social media to answer important personal issues and are forgetting to contact people that they know face to face, who knows what messages people are receiving. It's a big issue, it's a powerful issue, and it's an interesting one to explore. I, a few years ago, got rid of all my social media with the exception of YouTube, and it's because I use it for my videos, but I don't find I've missed any of it. The call is your own, of course. And I hope this has been a good start for you. We have one more chapter to do, so good luck, everybody. Keep up the good work. We're almost there. Bye now.